This episode of Climactic was recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, whose sovereignty was never ceded. We wish to pay our respects to leaders past, present, and emerging, and we look to the traditional owners of this land, who lived in harmony with it for tens of thousands of years, as vital partners in returning to a sustainable way of life.
There are dire warnings that New South Wales will be hit by increasingly extreme weather.
2015 was the hottest year since climate records began.
Your show this July was the single hottest month in recorded history.
Australia sweltered through its hottest spring on record.
Climate change is now affecting every country on every continent.
It's the rate that's of great concern.
And what do you put that rate down to?
Oh, it's human activity.
We have everything we need. Some still doubt that we have the will to act, but I say the will to act is itself a renewable resource.
Hello and welcome to Climactic, the podcast collective by and for Australia's climate community. My name is Mark, and today I'd like to start this episode by saying thank you. Thank you for being with us as we arrive at today's milestone. This marks 100 episodes of Climactic. 75 numbered episodes, 7 in a Victorian state election mini-series, a couple interviews that were too good not to split into 2 parts, and multiple recordings of live events that otherwise would have been lost to those that didn't attend. Thank you for being with us through it all, or for jumping on when you did. Thank you for telling your friends, telling your family members about the show, for using Climactic as a source of information, a way to learn about groups to get involved with, actions that you can take, or as a source of inspiration, a light when things are feeling a little dark. And speaking for myself, I want to say thank you for enabling a dream of mine to become a reality. As someone who, 2 short years ago, was an outsider to the climate community, someone new to Australia, new to Melbourne, someone who didn't know how to convert their fear and anxiety about the climate crisis into action, thank you for enabling me to do something positive, something hopeful, and really importantly, something fun. It's been an amazing journey so far with Climactic, and I'm so excited about where we're going. So thank you, Climactic Collective, for 100 episodes. Congratulations, and onward and upward. And now let's get into it. I'm so happy to tell you that this episode is an interview conducted by Bronwyn Gresham, our resident clinical psychologist and all-around ace interviewer. Bronwyn's guest today is Anthony Gleeson, a man known to many in the Melbourne climate community and further afield. He's a stalwart. But Bronwyn does a great introduction to him, so you're going to know a lot more about Anthony soon. But I just wanted to note here up top that this is the second time that Bronwyn has interviewed Anthony, and that the first interview, unfortunately, didn't get released. See, Bronwyn originally interviewed Anthony for what was going to be her own show, Feeling the Change. Bronwyn had this show basically ready to go. The great theme song, she had a logo, but it was proving to require just a little more resource than Bronwyn had available to give it. So, to our immense luck at Climactic, Bronwyn joined us. And this marks the 4th beautiful interview Bronwyn's delivered on Climactic. I mention this because one day, hopefully soon, Bronwyn's able to do Feeling the Change, that she's fully able to realize this idea for a show and make it a reality. And it's my hope that if, or hopefully when, that happens, that she'll do it as part of the Climactic network. See, what originally started as just an interview show that saw me and founding host Rich trade off interviews every other week is now growing into this kind of crazy vision I had 2 years ago for a podcast that's a platform for the climate community. That's a way to share stories and hear from voices that sometimes get overlooked, to break down silos, to connect across the climate community, and to strengthen it. Because we all know this community needs to be strong if we're going to be successful against the crises we face. So I hope I'm not embarrassing Bronwyn too much by using her as an example, but her story does personify what we're building here at Climactic, a group of storytellers who help each other and help the community to find and develop and nurture the stories that sustain us, empower us, and inspire us in the climate community. So without further ado, here's one of those stories now. From Bronwyn Gresham in conversation with Anthony Gleeson. Thank you for joining us for episode 75 of Climactic.
Welcome, Climactic friends. I'm Bronwyn, and today we are hearing from one of my favourite Melbourne activists, Tony Gleeson. Humble and vocal, he acts with courage and great resilience. Now, this was recorded a while back and already has an introduction embedded in. And aside from me wanting to have a more of a contemporary hello, I did want to flag that Tony shares his experience of depression. This is such an important conversation to have as we appreciate just how common depression is, and we want to move away from stigma. But it can also resonate with our empathic hearts. It can be really difficult to reflect on, and it can simmer up our own old pains. So please take care as you listen. Remember to breathe and send yourself kind words that support you. And if this does in any way become difficult for you, please be proactive. Reach out to a friend, a loved one, or to Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Okay, that's enough from me for now. Enjoy my second introduction. Well, hello, Climactic community. It's Bronwyn Gresham here, and I'll be your host for this episode. Now, as we record this episode at the Kathleen Syme Library, we're actually day 2 into NAIDOC Week. And for those of you outside of Australia, this is a week in July that's held across Australia dedicated to celebrating the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So it's truly a remarkable occasion, especially as Tony and I were chatting just before we had this interview. It's especially important as we begin to recognise more and more those important connections between caring for each other, caring for country, with honouring, repairing and learning from history as we grow through this together. So I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of our traditional owners and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and just to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And a special welcome to those who are listening in today. So today, I am so delighted to be sitting down with Tony Gleeson. And if you're listening in from the climate change community, especially in Melbourne, it's very, very likely that you've met Tony. In fact, I think he's become quite the legend for his loyalty to the cause, his diverse participation in activities, and capacity to be both playful and profoundly serious. No matter where I go, I always bump into him. And everyone else seems to know and admire him as well. He has been involved in climate change activities for around 4 decades and connected with over 10 climate change groups, including Community Radio Geelong and Extinction Rebellion. He spends a lot of his time now engaging in climate actions and spending time educating subjects like nonviolent direct action and just engaging others in conversations wherever he goes. As he says, whoever you talk to, you can find an angle. He is a partner, a grandfather of 4.
4.5.
4.5. Another one on the way.
Yep.
Oh, congratulations. Fantastic. And he's also an ex-tutor. Oh, no, you currently still tutor in English.
Do a little bit, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, welcome, Tony.
Thanks for having me, Bronwyn. It's a pleasure.
As always, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And, well, how about we begin? You do a lot of climate actions. And how about you tell us a little bit about one that's happened recently that is really something to be very proud of?
Yeah, well, I guess that you remember the ones that are the most recent in a lot of ways. There's been many, but I guess Friday night is right up there. A group of us dropped a couple of banners at the MCG. The AFL had a tribute game to emergency workers. They had all the different kinds of emergency workers there, AMBOs and fireys and SES, police, and a lot I didn't even know were emergency services that were there. So there were about 11 of us
Yep.
and managed to get a couple of banners into the ground at a time when the lights were out, which was very handy for us. We attached these banners, they're quite big, to the next to each other near the main scoreboard. The banners said, "Declare a climate emergency," which over 700 councils now, local government authorities now have done.
Woo!
And they're representing 160 million people.
It's so good.
Yeah. And the other one was to acknowledge the emergency workers. So it was something like emergency workers in the climate chaos front lines. And we acknowledge the AFL for doing that. But as always, it's what happened in the future that's key. And it seems to us AFL aren't, they've got quite a large footprint. So we're just challenging them to look at that and look at their contributions to the chaos that the emergency workers are going to face and are facing. If we look at what's happening in the Northern Hemisphere right now, just mass chaotic weather and temperature and all of that. So that's going to be replicated here in our summer. We can confidently say that I'm not psychic, but we can confidently say that that's going to happen here.
Yeah.
And these workers, if the AFL truly is concerned about their trauma, they, not just them, but they were the ones that were spruiking. They have to look at what their contributions to that trauma is.
Absolutely. So I wasn't aware that I'm not a football fan, don't judge. So I wasn't aware that the AFL was going to be paying a tribute to emergency frontline service workers. What is the connection there? Why have they decided to call this up as important?
Well, they pride themselves in being progressive, and they've come out on issues like racism, gay rights, discrimination generally. And they just felt that it was, in this particular game, I'm not sure what the connect. It was Collingwood, the mighty Maggies, no bias, versus Hawthorn. I'm not sure why it was that particular game, but they often have tribute games, and this was the one chosen for the emergency workers.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about how one goes about organising something like this, or maybe actually just what it was like for you as someone who's been doing this for such a long time? What's the key message that you want people to receive when they see a banner like that at an AFL game?
Yeah, not just look at it, but ask the AFL if they're members. I think Richmond's got 100,000 members, Collingwood's got 80,000, Hawthorn, I'm not sure, but they've all got lots and lots and lots and lots of members. And if members start asking that question, things change.
Yep.
The climate emergency declarations all over the planet didn't just happen. It was ordinary, everyday people said, this needs to happen.
Yep.
And they talked to other people and they said, yeah, I agree, I'll help. That's how it always starts. So we're hoping that a few seeds were planted on Friday night. The media response was lukewarm, as we expected. There's been a fair bit of coverage on social media. But the media that did cover it, SEN Radio in Melbourne, Sports Entertainment Network, I think it's called, they just devote themselves to sport, and Fox Sport, they both wrote articles, but with no sort of sympathy at all for the message. So we're going to be contacting them and just, do you really want to know why we did that?
Is that partly because, and this may be a sweeping statement, but that some people in the general public don't, the technique of direct action like that doesn't appeal to them? There's something about it that doesn't...
Yeah, possibly, but when you've tried everything else, you've done you're all petitioned out.
Yep.
When you've spoken to your local member, when you've done it all the legal methods, maybe you bend the law a bit, you break it. Now, no one was hurt on Friday night.
Yep.
The people that were sitting near us, we got in early and got the front row, but the banners were so long that we needed a number of people beside us, one side and the other, to help tie it, and they did.
Wow.
Without no worries.
I think that's the part that we also need to see, isn't it? Just because we know people in the general community are significantly concerned about the climate emergency, and we know that they're getting frustrated, and how nice would it be so if you're listening, reach out to us and let us know how much you support this action. We'll put a picture up on the show notes as well, because we need more and more people who hadn't thought of this before to say, oh my gosh, that was a powerful message, and that activated me to look into it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just Extinction Rebellion has got a position now in around about 50 countries.
Yep.
We've got the school strike for climate has got over 2 million kids that have taken. There's a whole movement.
People are on our side.
Yeah, there's a general recognition that we don't have to live the way we're living. A better way is possible. We're trashing the planet, but we're trashing each other as well. And it doesn't have to be like that. So more and more people are being empowered by that and realising that it's a hell of a lot more healthy to be part of the solution than it is in worrying about the problem.
And to do it in a way that's respectful and non-violent, like you've been training
the non-violence are given. It just the whole dynamics change, and it gives opponents reason to have a go at you from all different directions. But non-violent is no matter how much violence is against you. And like the police, in all my experience with police, I've done a lot of police liaison now, and they've got kids, they've got grandkids, and they've got their job to do.
Yep.
And they just say, look, we've got to. Yeah, don't want to bring bad vibes onto police, but if the first thing I say every time I come across them is, this is non-violent. You have nothing to worry about. We're here to get a message out. There's going to be no violence whatsoever, and we'll move on. We're not going to be here. If we give them a bit of a guide about how long they're going to be there, and some people see that as soft policing, but to me, it's if they approach that in an aggressive way, I think they realise just how bad that looks.
Yeah, there's something much more courageous about compassionate policing as opposed to aggressive policing. Yeah. And it sounds like they're overall quite responsive.
In my experience, yes. And one of the things that has made it so much easier to be an activist is the phone. Like they're ubiquitous, and if anything, there's a cry goes up all the time, the whole world is watching. Is this how you want to be presented? And it's, that power that you feel in people. And I spent way too long not feeling that and being shy and not speaking up, seeing bad things happening and not speaking up against them. And it was a waste of time, but I'm trying to make up for it now.
I was just about to ask, if we open the Book of Tony and we just go back a few chapters, because you and I have spoken about your upbringing a little bit and how you grew up on a farm and you're actually quite a shy kid. And how does a shy kid get to where he is now and, speaking on community radio, training people, doing really public actions? You even ran nude somewhere, didn't you?
Oh, that was taken out of context. No, partly nude.
It was a classic story. We'll have to save that for another time.
Yeah. We just had a message at the clocks. The clocks at, you're not going to get away with that. The clocks at Flinders Street. One night, a few of us wrote some letters on our buttocks and dropped our dacks, and they just happened to have a message associated with them. Something about no coal, I think it was.
Oh, my goodness.
And now for Climactic Community Corner. This is a space we make freely available to the climate community to share news, updates, call-outs, to use as a community notice board. Please feel free to make use of this yourself as an individual or a group. Just go to www.climactic.fm/community corner for information on how to get your message on the show. This message comes from Stop Adani's Melbourne chapter, who reached out to us to help promote their Stop Adani events for the month of September. These are a series of actions taking place outside the GHD headquarters on Lonsdale Street. GHD Engineering, as many of you may know, has partnered with Adani over the past 7 years and is currently working on Adani's rail line as well as elements of their mine site infrastructure, which is in direct contrast to GHD's own sustainability policy. Following on from their GHD Divorce Adani event, they're hoping to inspire individuals and groups to adopt a day and do any sort of action at 180 Lonsdale Street. Take a photo and email it to stopadanimelbs@gmail.com, as well as share it on all their social media channels with hashtag GHDStopAdani and hashtag StopAdani. Ideally, they're aiming for 30 straight days of community outrage outside of Adani's partner in crime GHD's headquarters, as a deterrent to other companies considering getting involved with Adani and to pressure GHD not to continue the hypocrisy of contributing to the destruction of our future. If people are interested, they can just take part or get in contact at stopadanimelbs@gmail.com. Our thanks to Stopadani Melbourne for that message and for their continued excellent work. If you've got a message you'd like heard on Climactic Community Corner, please just get in touch at www.climactic.fm/communitycorner.
Did you ever imagine as a young kid that you would be sitting here now talking about all of these things that you've achieved?
No, not really, but it just, I don't know, if you just open yourself to the universe, these things happen. And I'm really grateful for the parents that I had. I grew up with a love of nature and a sense that you didn't just exist in a community, you did what you can to make it a better place. And those have held me in good stead right through. I think I was about 16 or 17 and I came under the influence of a Catholic priest, and there's lots of bad news stories about them, but I can't share them. But we were complaining about not having anything to do. We're part of a youth group and we're complaining about not having anything to do underage, and he just looked at us all and said, "What are you going to do about it?" And I think that's part of, so it's
It flipped your brain into thinking about a solution.
Yeah, and then 6 months later, we had this packed hall with bands from Melbourne, and we had lawyers in town that were writing contracts for us, and people that weren't guarantors for us. And once that happens, you think, "Whoa, geez, yeah, what's next?"
Yeah, it's
you
such
can't
a
sit back.
critical life learning, isn't it? That you've got some power to influence.
Yeah. And then I taught for over 30 decades, and 30 years, 3 decades.
3 decades.
And enjoyed that. I probably worked there for probably 3 or 4 years longer than I should. My heart was in climate, being part of the solution to climate, and it wasn't happening at the school I was in.
How did your heart get more into that? Because you grew up on a farm and your parents did encourage that connection with nature, and then you went into teaching, but over a period of a few years you kind of felt that, that restlessness or need to kind of do something else. Do you have a sense of what that was that kicked you into that?
I guess I was in the school I was at, I was probably offsetting everyone's emissions.
Right.
Tony will do this, Tony will do that. And it's a fair weight to carry. And I was having, I had discussions with head teachers saying that they thought it wasn't my job as an English teacher to talk about climate change. And Why did
you want to talk about climate change so much?
English, it's free range as an English teacher. To me, it didn't matter whether kids knew the difference between, like right now, it didn't matter if they knew the difference between a noun or a verb, but I think it was crucial that they knew the sort of world that was developing around them and that they had a capacity to mould that world. And, I spent a lot of time doing that. And it just got, I guess over time, it just got more than I could. I just saw there was better ways of being a climate activist than doing it in the classroom. Yeah, and I've come across kids that I taught since then have said that they've now, because of the contact with the classes that I ran and student leadership stuff that I did, that was an awakening for them. So, we all Paul Merkovich awakened me, or Mum and Dad, and then it goes on. We all stand on someone's shoulders, all of us.
And I'm just going to be really naive here and ask, Paul Merkovich?
He's the priest,
Great.
the Catholic priest,
Yeah. Okay, for some reason I thought it was someone that I should know.
No.
I thought,
No one probably, well, I think a lot of people would in different parts of rural Victoria would know Paul. He's influenced lots of lives.
Yep, as have you.
Yeah. Well, I think we've all got a bit of a responsibility in the front.
Yeah, we absolutely do.
Yeah.
And thinking about, the first line responders like firefighters, police, ambulance, and the very important impact of those events on their mental health. And we know there are documents out there outlining the mental health impacts of the nature of that work. And then we've got that happening in the context of climate change and more severe and frequent extreme weather events and disruption due to climate change. So mental health, obviously, from my perspective, being a clinical psychologist, is really being highlighted. And we also see you and I, we meet a lot of people in the climate change community, and you and I both have felt what it's like to try to come to terms with climate change, both from an extreme weather perspective, but also from, what our future holds, to the drivers of climate change and trying to change some of those things. And it can really be, there's so many things that can get us down, that can make us feel quite powerless and despairing and overwhelmed. And I just wondered if you would mind sharing with the community out there a time when you did feel quite depressed or down about climate change, and what was contributing to that at the time.
Yeah, well, yes. I think it's an important discussion for two reasons. One, there's still a stigma around mental illness, and I live with that. I live with depression. And I guess it probably... It comes from a trip I took to northern India, and there's a group of young people there. Once you were 25, you had to move on to another group. But they were working flat out every day in their communities to reduce their carbon emissions.
Right. And sorry, how old were you at the time when you went to did this work?
Well, it was early this in the 21st century. So I think 2000 so about 15, 16 years ago. So around 50 probably.
Yeah.
So so I went there. These guys were and girls were reducing their carbon emissions. So they were encouraging people to build a certain way. So it was in the Himalayas. So in certain times of the year, it gets pretty cold there.
Yeah.
But they were passive energy houses. And I coming from the country with the greatest per capita emissions of carbon, I just couldn't believe, because they virtually had no carbon footprint. And I said to them, why are you doing this? And just pointed up to a glacier and said, well, when that goes, we have to go.
Wow.
And that kind of I was a climate activist before that, but I think that's kind of seared onto my consciousness, just climate justice and how these guys who contributed the least, and it's not just them, but it's also the Bangladeshis, Pacific Islanders, they've all contributed the least, but they're the ones that are suffering the most and first.
And they're so much more directly impacted by the changes of the landscape.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are too. Of course, we rely on the Mother Earth to provide to us in the city and rural, but it's really much more frontline. Yeah,
and if you push that out, into a larger picture, the Himalayas are the freshwater source for, I think it's 2 billion people. As it flows down into the sea in Bangladesh. So there's a number of major rivers, world rivers and people rely on that. So when they run out of water up the top, it just flows down to the others.
Did your mind just explode at that point?
Yeah. Just how unfair it all was, and just admiration for these guys, the foresight that they had. And I came home. And I don't know about other people, but I haven't travelled overseas a lot. But every time I come home, it's a really big adjustment. And I came getting back into school, and the greatest worry that kids seemed to have was what colour iPad they had or the shoes, and that really did my head in.
Yeah.
I thought, geez, you've got no... Yeah, okay, we'll leave it at that. But it just... Yeah, in terms of
the contrast between priorities in life, and it's not to blame children here for having those things at the front of their mind, because they're not faced directly with, it's not, I can sense that, you're a very understanding person, but it's just, what was it like dealing, because I feel like a lot of people struggle with this contrast.
I didn't deal with it at all. It's interesting. I was just thinking then that their kids are now school striking.
Yeah.
So, I didn't. There was a whole lot of turmoil going on in my life at the time, just adjusting to all this. And I ended up, a couple of years later, I ended up in a psychiatric institute to protect myself from myself for 2 or 3 months, I think it was. And that was kind of it was the best thing that ever happened to me in a lot of ways. And it took me from worrying about the problem to becoming just a determined passion to be part of the solutions. And I guess ever since then, that's what I've done.
Was there something about that experience that reconnected you to that part? When you were 16, you were saying how that part of you was ignited, that you did have the power and you could influence. If you put your mind to proactive action, then that kind of can slip away when we're feeling depressed. Was there something about...
Oh, yeah. Well, it was just how I was talking to myself, that self-talk, just a lot of classes they ran. You weren't just sitting in bed. You weren't forced to get up if you didn't feel like it, but it got easier and easier to get up every day. And you'd go for walks around and just experience the nature. It was in Geelong, but, you go past and it was kind of spring, so there's lots of flowers around, and that just
beautiful.
I guess that all nourished me instead of nothing. As people that have experienced depression, it's different for everyone, but it's for me and I think for most, it was completely debilitating. And but it was where I needed to be to wake up to myself, I guess.
Yeah.
What's the saying that when you need a lesson, the teacher comes along?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, and the inner teacher comes along too.
Yeah. And I just gained, maybe it was wisdom or just, I just see the hopelessness of where I was and that it didn't have to be like that. So it's all that thing about shit's going to happen no matter what it's how we respond to it. That's the critical factor.
Yeah.
And I think I learned how to handle the shit when it was like a forced retreat.
Yeah.
In so many ways. It was in a lot of ways a spiritual experience for me as well. Just reflect on what was important. And I wear this blue band here, tackling depression, anxiety, beyond blue.
Beautiful.
And it's one of the mantra I've got is it will pass.
Yeah.
And no matter how bad I felt, that was one of the tools I guess I picked up there was that the sun always came up the next day. And then so you get up and you just get a little bit of strength each day.
Yep.
And there's a bit of forcing yourself as well. And I had a brother who we're so far apart politically, but he displayed what's called tough love, I guess. But with compassion, if you can do that.
Of course you can. You can be fiercely compassionate. Absolutely.
And that certainly helped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes we just need the firmness in the love.
Yeah.
And it's not punishing tough love, it's activating tough love.
Yeah, well I think I tended to wallow a bit in what was going on.
It's so
what
easy
I was experiencing.
though, isn't it? And I've been there before as well, and I have moments even in the day of wallowing and getting caught up there. And I think what I'm hearing is one of the things that you've found keeps you nourished is kind of learning to redirect what you're paying attention to, noticing that we're wallowing or that we're kind of creating that inner world. We've already got it tough enough with climate change.
Yeah.
And then to wallow in it's like another layer of suffering. But if we can learn to recognize when we're in that space and find a way of shifting or moving, then that's one way to get through the day. One of my favourite songs is A Shapeshifter, Brand New Day. So I'm a big fan also of thinking about, the cycle of the day, just like the cycle of life and
just being mindful of things that are going on and not just drifting along.
Absolutely.
Just of smells, just of our senses and how we interact with the planet.
The world
basically.
around us.
Yeah.
I know. Like this morning, Tony and I, we were sitting in the sun.
Yes.
And the cool, fresh Melbourne morning, that sunshine was just delightful. Hey, we're having a really important conversation, and I'm also conscious that our time is almost up in the library. And I feel like we could get lost in conversation for hours and it would be very easy to do. I'm wondering if we could perhaps finish on some of the things that you particularly do. You've been involved for so long. Are there any kind of top tips or things that you could speak to what you do to nourish yourself or to be able to stay involved in climate change action?
All of the things that have been mentioned nourish me, that having tricks, that a simple thing like it will pass. Just saying that when we can say pretty horrible things to each other. And I think someone suggested that I start say, would you talk to a friend like that? And if you wouldn't, why are you talking to yourself like that? And it will pass is another one. Nurturing, I make sure that I find time to see good quality movies, thought-provoking movies.
Yep.
Garden, I love growing things. But, most of my life at the moment is devoted to climate change, and I get a real buzz out of that. Yesterday we did a nonviolent direct action training. There were about 24, 25 people there in Kensington, and just watching them just that dawn of their awareness of what their power and what collective power was capable of.
Yep.
That's sure. It's definitely worth getting out of bed for that to happen.
Absolutely.
And I guess I'm an educator essentially, and I really like doing that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's this inner piece of work out, being conscious that the way we talk to ourselves actually has a huge impact on how we feel, and creating a kind, friendly inner dialogue. But also something that's really comes out whenever I talk to you is this feeling inspired by others and realising that we're not doing this by ourselves, that we're part of what you've called an emerging culture.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Friday night there were ages. I was probably the oldest, but there was a 16-year-old, and I love that. Like that's 3 generations working together for kind of a common goal, and I get such a buzz out of that. And it's very rare that it happens. And on Friday night, and in any action, that someone's got your back. And that's kind of rare in our society today. I think traditional cultures thrived on that, but we've lost in our cult of individualism. We kind of lost that. So
we're rediscovering it, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got time for one last one.
Go for it.
Yesterday there was one guy who at the training said, "I don't really have any friends. I suffer with depression. I feel lonely and a lot of things like that." And I just pulled him up and stuck my hand up and I said, "How many others in this group have experienced depression?" And I'd say over half had.
Yep.
And you should have seen the look on his face. It was just like,
wow.
Once
you realise,
I'm not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that, almost 1 in 2 Australians will experience something like anxiety or depression over their lifetime.
Yeah.
Almost half.
Yeah. And he wasn't, you can see his whole mindset changed.
Yeah. That's
because
such a
of that.
powerful
Just
moment, Tony.
a lift. It was lifted off his shoulders.
Yeah. But what a wonderful contribution that you made with your teaching role model mentor hat on to be able to give that person the opportunity to see something beyond himself, that he's not alone.
Yeah, well, time will tell. But yeah, for that moment, it was gold.
Great.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That's such a lovely story to end on. And Tony, if people want to listen to you or connect with you, they can listen to you through Community Radio Geelong.
Yep.
What's the Sustainable Hour? Yeah,
that's the name of the show. But it's, I guess to get in touch, I think we're up to 270 something shows.
Fantastic.
So it's www.climatesafety.info. and then / the Sustainable Hour.
Beautiful. We'll put that link in the show notes as well. It's such a delight. I wholeheartedly thank you so much for your time this morning, Tony.
No,
and
pleasure.
I look forward to having you on the program again.
Anytime. Pleasure.
Thanks.
Wow. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Tony as much as I did. This conversation was packed with psychological gems, and here I want to reflect on 3 that I've picked up on around self-care. The first was to be inspired by others rather than comparing ourselves to others. Tony spoke of some of his role models and this important concept that we all stand on someone's shoulders. The second message was one of the importance of experience. This phrase comes to mind: you have to experience what you want to grow. And for Tony, he had an early experience of empowerment. And he calls this up in his memory again and again to remind himself that people, including him, can make a difference. And the third message is to reach out, to connect, to remember that we do have each other's backs and we're not alone. Thanks again for listening, and if you're interested in following up on any of this story, please head to our show notes. Until next time, see you later.
Thank you for joining us. You've been listening to Climactic, the flagship podcast of the Climactic Collective, a podcast network dedicated to lifting the voices of the climate community. You can find out more about the people behind Climactic and all the shows we produce at climactic.fm. We are a social enterprise podcast network, and we greatly appreciate your support. You can find a link to our Pozible where you can support us directly in the show notes of this episode or from our website. Thank you for listening, and from the whole Climactic Collective, keep up the great work and take care of each other in these climactic times.
The Climactic Collective.